The following is an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.
Hello, on today's show we're going to be learning how to make a small stained glass window. So what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to choose a project, we're going to choose some glass for the project, we're going to cut the glass for the project, I'm going to show you how to grind the edges so that they'll fit the pattern properly, and then we're going to wrap copper foil around the project. So that will take us pretty much the whole show today. I've decided to do this project here, which is a simple stained glass window, often done in beginner classes. It's got a limited number of pieces, and all the sizes and shapes are relatively easy for people to learn as a first project. So this is our goal. The first thing you need to do is to have a pattern. Now there are many books available with full-size stained glass patterns. As well, a lot of stained glass shops will sell individual patterns, so you don't have to be a free-form artist to work in stained glass. Although, by all means, if you can draw your own designs, you want to do that. As a caution, though, you should give some thought to learning what is possible to cut out of glass before you start doing your own designs, because there are limitations to what you can and can't do with cutting glass in different shapes. So what I'd like to point out with this particular pattern is the thickness of the lines. We take a fine-tipped Sharpie, and that is what we use to, first of all, we do it on a piece of graph paper. The graph paper is good because everything's going to come out square. And once we've got it done in pencil on graph paper, then what we do is we take the Sharpie and we go around and outline everything. It's important that you have a space of approximately a 32nd of an inch between each individual piece of glass. If you cut the glass too large, you're going to spend a lot of time grinding, which you will learn later is not something that you want to spend any more time than you have to. If you cut accurately, your grinding is much less and everything else moves along much more economically also. So we've got our pattern. The next thing is to choose glass. Now on this particular one, the artist decided to use all clear textures. And I think perhaps we can pick up a little of the iridescent film on a few of these pieces of glass. So the glass is all clear with different textures, and then the iridescence just adds a little bit on these two pieces here, adds a little bit of a oil on glass kind of a look, or oil on water kind of a look. I'm going to do it a little different today. I'm going to put a little bit of color into here. However, we're going to start off with glass bevels. And this is a 2-inch circular glass bevel. You can see that the edge is ground. If I move it around a bit, you can see how the light hits it in different ways. And there we go. And so this glass bevel is pre-done. You buy these already pre-done. They're made in large quantities in a factory. We buy them in boxes of 30. And so I have a choice here in this pattern. I can put 2 half circles, which is what we did in this particular one, or I could put a full bevel in there. So I would trace around the bevel. I don't want to trust that it's going to be exactly the right size. We always trace around each bevel. And also I've got some little 3/4 inch bevels here, and I'm going to use these instead of the 2 iridescent pieces there. So I've got 3 bevels to work with. I'm going to use some nice turquoise glass, a pale turquoise for some of the pieces. I'm going to use this white Baroque glass, which has some really nice character in it, for my central piece. And as well as a clear piece, which this is a really neat one. I like it. It kind of reminds me of caterpillar skin. I'm going to also use a darker turquoise. So I've got 2 different colors as well as the white, which to me is a neutral, and the clear glass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just demonstrate cutting some of these pieces using just a piece of regular window glass. And then we will proceed on to the grinding stage. So all of the glass that I chose, you can see right through it. So it's very simple to put the glass on top of the pattern. I don't have to make a pattern. Pardon me. Okay, this is the pattern I'm talking about, is my actual working pattern. In some cases, we'll cut a template out of a second pattern that we can place on top of the glass if we can't see through it. And that allows us to cut an opaque glass or a very dark glass. In this case, all the glass that I've chosen I can put on top of my pattern, and I can see through it quite readily. I'll just perhaps demonstrate that a little better. You can see if I hold it up here that it's quite easy to see through this clear glass, obviously, but also the turquoise glass that I've chosen. When I put that on top of the pattern, I can see through really easily. And this white one also, which I'm going to use for this long skinny piece. I can see through it very easily. Okay, so I've got my pattern. Remember from our cutting demonstration, we want to make sure that we're wearing either prescription glasses or safety glasses when we're cutting glass, because there are glass chips that will be created. So I'm wearing prescription glasses. If you don't wear glasses, get some safety glasses. And I'm going to start off cutting the biggest piece of whichever, the biggest piece I'm going to make of each piece of glass. So for example, if that turquoise is going to be 3 pieces, I will take a look at the 3 pieces I'm going to do out of the turquoise. I will do the largest one first. It makes sense that if you cut a large one and you mess up on it, you can always cut a small one from that large one, but you can't put a bunch of small pieces together to cut a larger one. So always start with your biggest piece of each individual glass type that you're going to be using. So in this case, I'm going to be doing these 2 pieces out of the clear glass. So I'll start off with those. I would like you to keep in mind that we want to, as well as doing cutting the largest piece first, we also want to cut the most difficult shape out of each individual piece first, so that there's no sense doing the straight lines, which are generally easier to do first. We want to do the more difficult curves, the inside curves, the outside curves, and then do the straight lines. And we'll have a higher success rate if we do that, and we'll have less waste in the long run. So the first thing I want to do is just cut off a piece that's roughly a little bigger than what I'm using, about 1/2 inch or so. So I'm going to go along. Remembering from our cutting demonstration, my body is parallel to the edge of the table. I'm putting the glass cutter onto the glass and then pushing forward. You should be getting the pressure from your shoulder. If your hand is shaking, that means you're trying to get too much pressure with your hand and not enough with your shoulder. So depending on the glass cutter you're using, this Thomas grip that I have fits right in there so I can get my whole arm into it. So I've made my first score. In this case, I'm going to use my hand since it's a fairly big piece, and I will just go up with my fingers, down with my thumbs. I can now put it back on my pattern, and I want to do this curve and this curve next, because those are really the most difficult cuts that I have to make. So keep in mind, I want to be able to see that black line in between all of my pieces. When everything is said and done and you put everything on top of your pattern to solder it, you need to have a little bit of space in between your pieces or they will not fit properly. So I'm going to take my glass cutter. Now this piece here is not going from edge to edge, but I have to score from one edge of the glass to the next. So I'm going to start a little bit over, and I'm going to bring myself over to this black line. And I'm not cutting on the line, I'm cutting right on the inside of the line. So my goal is to have all of the black line cutting smaller than the black line, but not having a lot of white showing later on when I'm finished cutting. So notice I started at one end, I went all the way to the other end, and then even though my piece of glass I'm cutting stopped there, I went all the way to the border of the glass. And now I'm going to use my running pliers. And remember, it's important with the running pliers that the screw is up so that they're going to work properly. Now this screw is it's non-functional for our purpose. It's actually meant if you're doing fish tanks and you wanted to use thicker glass, you could adjust it so that the jaws would not close completely and you wouldn't mar the edges of your fish tanks. In our case, all the glass we're using is much thinner, and I just use this as a way of knowing which way I should be holding the pliers. So the screw is always up. So in this case, I line it up with my one score, and as you can see, it has run from there to there. And now I'll flip it around and I'll see how far it'll run from this side. So in essence, it's run everywhere except this last inch. So I'm just now going to take my fingers and apply a little bit of pressure there. So running pliers on both ends, my hands for the last one. So now I carefully line it back up on my pattern. It's really important that as we go and cut the different sides of this piece of glass, that it's always lined up properly, because I can cut each side perfectly, but if I don't align it, it will not be a good cut later on or a good fit later on. So now I want to do this little half circle cut here. In this case, it's more like 1/8 of a circle that I'm cutting out of it. To do that, I line this up as well as I can. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from this point to that point. So I'm going to go straight across, first of all. And I'm going to leave this on the pattern. I'm going to make one more score now, which is going to actually be the one that I want to end up with. So I go and I'm just on the inside of that line again. And I'm just going from this point to the next point. So again, I pick up the glass. I will use my running pliers, and it's a straight line, so it broke no problem. Now I take the Grozier pliers, and remember the Grozier pliers, the flat side is on the top, the curve is at the bottom. I'm going to start from one side and apply pressure. And I'm doing this so that it went halfway. So again, I didn't necessarily want to go the whole distance, because once glass picks up speed, it can very easily just straighten itself out. I like to think of glass as being a very lazy material, and it will take the fastest way to the edge of the glass as possible. So it's going to want to straighten itself out and go to the edge. So I have to coerce it to get it to take a curve like this. So the first part I got started. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to apply pressure to the other side and continue on with that break. So rather than going straight to this, though, I found by going straight across, I removed most of the excess glass. So my success rate is generally going to be higher if I do that. So now I have two sides I have to be careful of and make sure they're lined up properly. So that's looking good. Now I will go and do the straight lines. Again, I'm listening for that score. If it's too heavy or too light, it's not going to do what I want it to as frequently as I would like it to. So, and also notice I did one score and I left the glass on the pattern. I did my second score, but I did not go over that score line. There's three things that you can do, or a number of things you can do to dull the head on your glass cutter. The first one is to go over score lines twice. If you go over score lines twice, what you're doing is you are going to be putting excess stress on the glass cutter. It will not last as long. The second thing is don't drop it on a hard surface. So if you have a cement floor underneath your or beside your work table, you should probably put a carpet or something there. So if you do accidentally drop it, it's not going to hit the concrete. And the third thing is don't lend it to anybody, because if you lend it to somebody, they're going to do one of those first two things, and your cutter is going to be dull by the time you get it back. So now I just pick it up and I'm going to break these in the same order that I scored them. And these running pliers, as you can see, they work fantastic. And you get a lot less cuts on your fingers. I mean, working with glass, I'm constantly getting little cuts, but I seldom, if ever, get a serious cut. And using the running pliers really helps quite a bit. So my goal was to have all of the black lines showing around this piece, but not a lot of white. And when I look down on this, straight down, I can see that I have accomplished that. So I feel really good about that. So what I want to do now is I'm going to cut this next piece, which is right beside it, which has curves on two sides. So that'll just be another little exercise. It'll give us a good idea of how to approach cutting these pieces. Keep in mind that I always like to move my pattern so that I'm always cutting roughly in a 45-degree angle. Rather than trying to cut off in different directions where often I'll feel awkward, I keep moving my pattern so that I'm going to be in a 45-degree angle. Now if I was trying to economize on glass, what I would do is I would move this to the corner and I would use these two straight lines, which are actually straight, for exercise purposes. I would say, you want to get as much practice as you can. So I would encourage people to only use one edge of the glass while you're practicing. But in reality, once you've developed your skills, you will try and use as many common lines as you can. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this line here first. And the reason for that is it's got actually two wows in it, whereas this one only has one wow. So my success rate, I want to make sure that I do this one and get this one cut out properly before I move on to the rest one, the other cuts, because I just don't want to waste my time and leaving the last one till the end and then having this one straighten itself out. So again, I start on the edge of the glass, go slightly forward before I start applying pressure, And notice that I kind of move my body around a little bit. A lot of people mention when they're using these cutters that there's a swivel to the head. And that is absolutely true, but the swivel will follow wherever your hand goes. You do not have to control that swivel. You just have, as you can see, there's a bit of movement to this. It just follows wherever my hand goes. That is not a concern. Okay, so again, I've got my score. I'm going to start from one end and see how far it goes. In this case, it went from here to here. Now I'll flip it around to the other side. And because this has the double wow, I've got the one score coming here, the other score coming here, and now I'm going to have to use my hands to finish it off. There are some different kinds of tools you can get that will go in and put pressure further along the score line. But I mean, you got your hands attached to your arms, you may as well use them. So between the running plier and my hands, I could very easily break this. So now I put it back on my pattern. And that was my most challenging side to cut, and I did that successfully, so I can pat myself on the back and move on to the next one. The next one is this side here. So this one, again, I'm going to have to run up onto my piece of glass because it doesn't come right to the edge. So I'm coming up, coming onto the glass, following my score from one side to the next. Taking my time. Notice I'm not rushing. I could go faster if I wish, but on the other hand, there's no value. Accuracy is the most important thing. There's no sense in rushing through, cutting the piece too small, in which case you're going to have a wider line when you start to put your copper foil and your solder onto the piece. Or if you cut it too big, you just spend a lot more time grinding. So I'm definitely going to find that I'm going to have to use the running pliers from both sides. So again, it ran to there. Flip it around to this side and it'll probably connect up. Yeah, so it connected up now. No problem at all. So again, I put it down onto my pattern. Make sure that I line it up as accurately as possible. And now I'm going to make this score here. So I again just move it to roughly 45-degree angle. And make this score. Break it. Move my pattern around so that again I'm cutting at a 45-degree angle. Make sure that I take my time to line it up properly. And now I make my final cut. So that is how I'm going to proceed with cutting all the rest of the pieces. I will be cutting the largest piece of each color first, the most difficult side of whichever piece I'm cutting first. And I like to cut all of my pieces at one time. So I'll cut all my pieces first and then move on to the grinding process. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to take a moment, set up my grinder, and when I come back, I will show you how you can grind these pieces to fit the pattern perfectly. Okay, the best invention that we've had in the stained glass industry in the last 100 years is the glass grinder. This has been available for about 40 years now, and it will help us to shape our pieces. So nobody cuts perfectly, even myself. There are always little adjustments you have to make on each individual piece of glass. So this tool will do it for us. There's a face shield so we don't get glass powder coming up to our face, and there is a surround that I normally put around, but then you wouldn't see what I was doing, so we're going to forget about that today. But keep in mind that glass powder is not something you want to be breathing in. So whenever you clean up with a glass grinder, you always keep it wet. Take a Windex container, get the powder wet, and clean it up with a paper towel and throw it in the garbage. So what I've done here is I've taken my piece, I put it on here, and to be honest with you, I cut it really well, so there's not a lot of grinding to be done. However, what you do is you take a black felt pen, and you will mark where you need to remove excess glass. So I'll just mark there, and I'll say mark over here. Having done that, I can then see where I need to work. I will go around the whole piece once though, just to get off the sharp edges. So this grinder is about 25 years old. Once you have a good grinder, it'll last a long time. So I put the glass right on the work surface. Very important to remember, you cannot cut yourself with these tools. It's not like a saw or a bandsaw or a router or anything like that. It has industrial diamonds on it. You can do your nails on it. If you wish, you can use it to shape your nails, but it will not cut your skin. So that's not an issue. So what I do is I'll go around first just once. While I'm doing this, note that I'm putting even pressure on it. I don't want it to be bouncing. If I go too lightly, it just bounces around. So what I want to do is put down even pressure. And I round off the edges very slightly, not dramatically, but just enough so that they're not going to be too sharp. So now I can go back to the areas that I wanted to remove more glass, and I apply more pressure. Now the way this tool works is water is a lubricant, and so water is poured over the sponge and into this reservoir here. The water will make sure that the powder from the glass ends up down as much as possible down in the reservoir here, and as well it lubricates it so your glass doesn't crack because it overheats. So that's the glass grinding process. What we would do is dry this off. It's important that you put a piece of plastic over your pattern because you don't want to get it wet. Once it's wet, it starts to wrinkle, and you can't solder on it later on, and we have to solder on top of this. So dry your piece off really well, check it. If there's a part that you missed, mark it again with the pen, and do that with every individual piece. And my theory is that if you grind every piece to fit the pattern properly, I wouldn't put all the pieces in there. I would just do one at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up now, and I'm going to show you how to put the copper foil around the edge of this piece of glass. Mosaics have been around for hundreds, literally thousands of years. They were used in floors in Pompeii. A lot of the old Greek ruins and Roman ruins have got mosaics in the floors and in the walls for decoration. Ravenna is a fantastic treasure trove of mosaics. These are some of the churches you can see in Ravenna. This particular church, the walls were totally covered in mosaics. I mean, literally 40 feet high, hundreds of feet long, many, many small pieces. Again, these pieces are probably quarter of an inch to half an inch square. The glass is very thick. It's usually about 3/8 to a half an inch thick, and very ununiform in thickness. And the idea was that the light would hit it in many different ways. So when you get the light from the candles during a service or the light from the windows shining in on this, not only do you see the beautiful design in the glass, but you get a lot of sparkle happening, especially if there's a lot of gold leaf. And you can see here with behind Christ's head and on the book, a lot of this glass had gold leaf on the front or the back of it for different effects. And you can imagine with glorious sunlight coming through how this golden glass just absolutely glowed and really gave a feeling of regalness and royalty to the images that were being portrayed. A lot of symbolism, a lot of this was done during the Byzantium era, and a lot of these symbols are, more of an Eastern type of a feel to it. This one is a mosaic which was actually much more recent, showing some nuns. And doing faces is very challenging in mosaics, but I think they've done a good job of accomplishing that in this particular piece here. Now this is how we've used some mosaics ourselves in the last number of years. On the outside of our studio, we put these mosaics on top of all our windows. And also on the side of our building, we have these large mosaics that are just all kinds of wildflowers that were native to Manitoba. This is a wonderful piece that Matthew McMillan made that was a fountain. You can see the water coming out of the mouth. This is a mask that was made by Lois Lowen. Her idea with that bottom part is that you could have smoke coming through that, and she actually had that accomplished in a number of situations. And of course, doing a backsplash for your kitchen. So isn't it wonderful to use just regular tiles for most of it, but to have this real focal point in the center of your kitchen? So during the break, I ground all the pieces to fit my pattern properly. It was important that they all fit within their little areas. And I then wrapped copper foil around these pieces. So that's what I want to show you now, how I actually wrap the foil around it. The reason we put the copper foil around the glass is because the next step is soldering it together. Solder is what holds smaller stained glass pieces like this together. So we need a surface for the solder to adhere to, and copper is the best choice for that particular purpose. Copper bends easily, so we can use it as a foil, and also it takes solder very easily. This process was developed in the late 1800s by Louis Comfort Tiffany for a lot of the lamps that he designed. And at that time, they would have a sheet of copper. Their glass was varying in thickness, so they didn't want one particular width. They wanted many different options. So they would cut the sheet to the size they needed, put beeswax on it, and very quickly adhere the glass or the foil, pardon me, to the glass before the beeswax got hard and wouldn't stick anymore. We are very fortunate now, though. We have copper foil that comes in a nice coil. It comes in specific sizes. We can get as narrow as 1/8 of an inch, as wide as 1/2 an inch. So lots of opportunity for different thicknesses of glass and different overlay opportunities. It also comes in 3 different glue backings. So it's always copper foil, but it can have a black back like this foil that I'm going to use now. Later on when we're doing the soldering, I will show you how we're going to color the solder afterwards. So solder is always silver. If you want to leave the solder silver and you can see through the glass, we have a silver solder or a silver foil, silver-backed foil that you can use. I always put black patina on my pieces, so I use this black-backed foil so that if you can see through the glass, the black patina and the foil that you can see the back of all matches. And if you want to leave it copper, then there is a clear adhesive you can use to put on the glass so you can see through. So, foiling is a very simple process, but it is often done poorly. You need to take time and you need to be accurate. If you put the foil on poorly, what you're going to find is you're going to have more foil on one side than the other, and you're going to have very inconsistent solder lines, because where it's more on one side, that means it's less on the other, and you get very irregular lines, which is not considered a very professional finished piece. So I am right-handed. I hold the glass in my right hand, the foil in my left hand, and I'm going to start 1/4 of an inch around one side. So what I have done here is I have an equal amount of foil on each side of the glass. And as I'm applying it, I'm only going 1 inch at a time. And I go 1 inch and I push it down, and then every once in a while I just go back and push it down a little more firmly. So again, I'm going 1 inch at a time. If I don't like it, I can pull it back and do it again. I've washed all these pieces of glass so that there's no residue of glass, there's no powder on there. And so you can do it at least twice. So 1 inch, push it down, continue all the way around. Some of these bigger pieces you have to keep adjusting your hold on the glass. It's very important, though, that you don't try and do this whole length. You know, if I try and do all this in one swoop, I'm definitely going to have issues with it going on evenly. So 1 inch at a time. So now I'm going to go over where I started. So I've got that 1/4 inch minimum overlap. I'm going right to the corner, and this is thin enough you can just rip it. You don't need to use a knife or scissors or anything. I then take my hands and I'm pushing this way. So although I'm sliding along, all of my pressure is going towards the center of the piece of glass. You kind of tuck in the corners, just kind of like a little gift birthday present. And then you take any kind of a hard object. This is called a fid. It's used specifically for this purpose. And you just go along. I would do this on the tabletop, but I'll just hold it up so it's easier to see. And usually you can go over it once and then a second time, and that's really all you need to do. So the idea is this foil has to adhere really firmly to the glass. If any of the flux, which is part of the soldering process we'll describe in the next show, gets underneath the foil, it lifts it up and it no longer adheres properly to the glass. So it's really important that you burnish it well with this tool. Thank you very much, and we will see you in the next segment.
The proceeding was an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.